I'm wondering why building muscle with weightlifting to increase body weight helps with endurance. That seems totally counterproductive, right? We're kind of bookending this one talking about, body types, weight, all that stuff. He says, I know quite a bit of rowers who weightlifted and gained weight and then improved their endurance power. What doesn't make sense to me is that I thought they would be building type 2 fibers when they gain muscle mass, and I wouldn't think those type 2 fibers would help at all when it comes to endurance. Great question. Right, Chad?
Okay. Yep. So let me rephrase it, Kevin. You're basically asking, how can hypertrophy further endurance capabilities? Seems like the two run counter to one another, right?
What's hypertrophy? We should probably define that.
So hypertrophy is just bigger muscle fibers. So same muscle fiber just gets bigger. That's it. So bigger muscles. I'm going to try to keep this to 15 minutes, okay? We want to do some live questions. And
you can do it, Chad. The three amigos, we can do all of it.
Yeah. Okay. So, but this is it's a hot topic for me, always has been. Strength training and strength training's influence on whether it's negative or positive on endurance performance. I honestly can't get enough of this stuff. So there are two ways to get stronger. You can either increase your muscle mass, or what's typically measured as cross-sectional area. So just bigger fibers, and this is hypertrophy, or you can go about it via neural adaptations. So how the brain communicates with the muscle, how the muscles work nervously. So let's first look at strength without changes in body mass, because us as endurance athletes, that's pretty much what we're seeking. It's not really what the question's about, but let's cover both sides of this. There are a couple ways to improve strength without really influencing your body mass. One of them is explosive strength. This is also referred to as low force, high volume, velocity. I'm going to make that mistake. I even changed the abbreviation so I wouldn't. So low force, high velocity. So you're not moving a lot of weight, but you're moving it really rapidly. And the rep range, the loading typically falls on the low end of things. So 30 to 60% of what you can move one time. So your 1 RM, your 1 repetition max. Examples of this would be 3 sets of 20 jump squats, or a couple 30 rep sets of a split squat per leg. A body weight version of this would be jumping rope. Something as simple as jumping rope. Even jumping jacks qualify as plyometrics. I mean, it's the same thing. It's high velocity with a low load. Another way to do it is with heavy strength. So now we're talking the other end of that. So now it's high force, low velocity. So you're not moving it fast, but you're moving a ton of weight. And now we shift to the other end of the loading range, all the way up to 100%. So let's say 80 to 100% is typically where this is set. So think of 3 sets of an exercise done 1 to 5 times. If you're working at your 1 RM, you're going to do it 1 time. If you can do it more, it's not your 1 RM. So the idea here is exactly super sciencey right there.
Chad dropping bombs. Sorry, Chad.
Yeah. So we're with heavy strength training, we're trying to improve a lot of things, and a lot of these things carry over to endurance performance. So one thing that you do improve, or will improve if you do it right, is peak force. And this is another one of those tides that lifts all ships. So this can be reduced to your 1 second max torque. So if you go all out for 5 or 6 seconds, what did your best 1 second yield? And let's take, for example, someone who can do 600 watts for a second versus someone who can do 1200 watts for a second. Both of them want a 300 watt FTP. Is it realistic for someone to be able to operate at 50% of their maximum torque for the better part of an hour? Not so much. But you take that 600 watt 1 second power, grow it to 1200 watts over however long, whatever. For the sake of this discussion, we're going to double it. Now that 300 watt FTP goal is 25% of your maximum 1 second torque, far more realistic. So basically you're increasing your ability to produce force. In increasing your ability to produce force increases your opportunity to lift your sustainable power. You got to push that ceiling way up. Otherwise you have to operate too close to the ceiling, and it's just not tenable. It's not going to happen. And then metabolically, you're only ever able to operate at so high a percentage of your peak power capability. Again, you can't stay at 50% of your maximum for a long period of time. 25%? Absolutely. Another thing we're trying to improve with heavy strength, that high force, low velocity, is it's a mouthful, but it's your max voluntary isometric contraction. And if you think of moving against an immovable force, or not moving, contracting against an immovable force. So as much force as you can exert, but nothing goes anywhere, that's an isometric contraction. That's maximum, and it's voluntary. And what this does is it reduces the number of motor units that are necessary to produce a certain amount of force. So this many muscle fibers had to fire, but through practice, through increasing this isometric force capability, less muscle fibers are recruited to do the same job. You can also improve your rate of force, or the heavy strength work improves your rate of force development, your RFD. And this basically changes or reduces the time to reach your peak force. You get there quicker, you recruit faster. It also increases your muscle perfusion. So it increases how rapidly you can perfuse the muscle with blood and all the things it brings with it. It can also improve your musculotendinous stiffness. And this may not seem like it applies to cycling, but it absolutely does. I mean, it definitely applies more to running, but when we can employ any aspect of the elastic nature of our muscles to further our power on the bike, why wouldn't we? It's free power. It's free muscle contraction, basically. And then we can also increase our economy or our efficiency. These two terms get interchanged enough, but for this argument, they can be the same thing. And we improve this movement economy or this efficiency in a number of ways. One of them is to increase what's termed the agonist activation. So the prime mover. When it comes to the pedal stroke, the quads extend the knee. So we can improve how well that activates. We can increase the synergistic activation. So all the muscles that facilitate or help the quad extend the knee, the quads extend the knee. So that's the synergistic side of things. We can decrease the antagonistic activation. And this is termed reciprocal inhibition. So if you think of, again, the quads are trying to extend the knee to drive the pedal down. The hamstrings want to flex the knee to not necessarily bring it back up, but just the other side of how that joint actuates. And if they're active, while one muscle is doing one thing, the other muscle is countering that muscle's job. So the idea here is being really quite simply muscle coordination. We want certain muscles to turn off while certain muscles are turned on. We want the muscles to support the muscles that are turning on to turn on. Basically, we want to improve our muscular coordination. And a really simple example of this is climbing out of the saddle. So in terms of efficiency, how wasteful are you? What's the oxygen cost when you're all over the bike trying to put out the same number of watts, where if you do it in a more coordinated manner, you bring the movement economy up, your lack of coordination improves, you use less oxygen, you are more efficient. And then from the economy perspective, it's something that remains high late into long rides. I think this is something a lot of people don't recognize, but if at the end of a 3 or 4 hour ride, you're still running reasonably efficiently, you have lower blood lactate levels, lower heart rate levels, this is a boon to performance. And it's something that is tough to convey by just going out and doing long miles. Strength training does a much better job at it. And this high force, low velocity training can actually lead to greater contractile strength in your type 1 fibers. So your slow twitch fibers can incur maximal strength gains. You can actually make your slow twitch fibers bigger. This carries. They have to be loaded differently. They have to be challenged differently, but those fibers can get bigger. So you can strengthen your endurance, as paradoxical as that sounds. And this leads to what? Greater average power over long distance events. So if you can bring your average power up even 5 watts over the course of many minutes, many hours, it has an impact. This high force, low velocity training, so strength, heavy strength work, can also increase your phosphocreatine storage, your glycogen storage in those capacities in your type 2 fibers. So your type 2A and your type 2B fibers. So we're basically loading these things up more and more, and we're doing it through strength training of all things. One of the formative studies by Hickson, and that's a good name to look up if this is of any interest to you at all, looked at high force, low velocity training, and they marked or measured a 30% increase in 1 RM. I think it was a squat, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And they did it without any increase in cross-sectional area. Thighs didn't get any bigger, but they went up 30% in strength. I mean, who wouldn't want that? You're stronger and you don't even weigh more.
That's like the biggest fear that's completely irrational, is like, as soon as I touch weights, I'm just going to get huge. Right. And that's irrational.
Yeah. So now let's get a little more back to the question at hand and talk about strength with the potential, and let's say potential, for additional mass. So increases in cross-sectional area ties directly to your increase in your peak power output and your time trial performance. Study after study validates this. There's a lot of evidence to support it. Bigger fibers can do more work. Bigger muscles can do more work, but bigger fibers don't necessarily mean more body mass and weight. And that's why I said there's a potential for it. If you look at a study Ronestad did back in 2010, showed an increase in cross-sectional area. So bigger fibers, but no body mass change, which is quite simple. You know, they swapped fat for muscle. So body composition shifted and they got stronger. Now they got more muscle, but they got less fat. So their body weight didn't change at all. And this is yet another vote of confidence in favor of strength training as one of the many things it is, an excellent fat burner. And then what about the mass in the non-driving muscles? So you're adding mass and they're not even the muscles that power the pedal stroke. Well, they do other things. They stabilize the torso. They help you improve your power transfer. That goes back to that movement economy we just talked about. And a perfect example of this is someone like Stefan Kung. I mean, watch that guy ride a bike. He is putting out big watts. You know, he is by the time he puts in for the size he is and the lack of aero. I mean, he's pretty aero, but he's a big guy. And he looks gorgeous. I mean, he rides that bike perfectly. There is not a bit of waste in that entire system. And here the movement economy is due to less wasted movement. Less movement requires less oxygen. Boom, greater efficiency.
Yeah. That's like if you're searching for the sort of gains and everything else that you're trying to move or trying to get, that's probably one of the easiest grabs right there. It's an efficiency grab that's absolutely within everybody's grasp.
Yep. And then a couple of things I'll talk super quickly about, because these are big topics and we're not going to cover them today, but is anaerobic power contributes to endurance too. You stay below 70% and you think, well, I'm not even using any of my type 2 fibers, but you actually are. And there's still some anaerobic and glucose utilization going on, even at low workloads. And anaerobic fibers aren't entirely anaerobic. And predominant is the word that's always used here because they're predominantly anaerobic, but your anaerobic fibers can contribute to highly aerobic work levels. They're still in play. So it's not really the worst thing to have plumper, type 2 fibers, those medium twitch and those fast twitch fibers, especially when it comes to those situations in a race where you need power. You can't just rely on endurance. You need to be able to push out some big watts for short periods of time. And then just a couple bits of encouragement to strength train. There's evidence that supports benefits across all levels of cyclists, all the way from off the couch to recreational, well, not off the couch, but recreational, all the way up to world tour level. Strength training works, and it works for everybody. It has to be done right, of course. And then if you just look past the performance impacts, it reduces injury. And anytime you reduce injury, not only are you not incurring injuries and having to go through that entire process, but fewer training interruptions. And the more consistently you can train, the quicker you get faster. And then finally, I want to put to bed some of the I'm going to bulk up fears, because first and foremost, adding mass is hard. It's hard for everyone. Even dedicated strength athletes struggle to add mass. There's a tipping point beyond which it is so hard to add. And the initial gains that you see when you start weightlifting, especially as an endurance athlete who isn't doing endurance training and decides to take up strength training for a brief period of time, is you get this rapid response. And you think, oh my God, I'm going to get huge. Give it time. That's all going to come back off. Again, we're constantly providing ourselves with signals that fly counter to strength objectives. We can't have it all. So, and then supplementary training by endurance athletes. Do you think that piling more work onto an already endurance loaded body is going to yield bigger muscles? I mean, that again, this is counter to everything. This is counter to how the body works. The body doesn't conserve when we're asking it to work all the time. It works. The increases in cross-sectional area. So the bigger muscle fibers are blunted. Again, no shortage of research on this matter by concurrent training. Anytime you add, and this is basically what I was just talking about, endurance training or add strength training to endurance training, it runs counter to it. And then finally, most ectomorphic somatotypes, to bring this all full circle, will forever struggle to get big. I mean, yes, you can modify your diet and increase your protein intake and frequency, and you can do high volume strength training, and you could even do anabolic steroids if your goal is simply to add muscle mass. But the likelihood of any of these things taking place in an endurance athlete is so slim. I mean, we are endurance athletes by and large. It'd be so hard for us to maintain a high level of endurance and add a high level of body mass.
Yeah. It just doesn't really work like that, right? So I know for Keegan, he's once again, go ahead and drink if you're playing that game. But he said that that's one of the biggest differences that he has made in his training to elevate him to the point where he's, best in the nation and getting to the point where hopefully he can knock on the door of some good World Cup finishes here.
That's how I spent the early part of my personal training career. I mean, basically the thing that led to all of this was rebuilding ruined endurance athletes, people who were injured all the time. And it wasn't that hard. I mean, they just needed to address some pretty simple, straightforward things. And I, in fact, rebuilt them. They became athletes who weren't injured as often, who could improve because they weren't constantly hobbled by some nagging issue.